Good evening and welcome to this special Culture Night event for Wicklow. We are on the stage of the Mermaid Art Centre, the Mermaid Theatre in Bray, and it's odd because in fact the auditorium is completely empty, but it's very nice to be here and to be in person with the author Christine Dwyer Hickey. Hi Christine, welcome.
Thank you, Helen.
It's great to meet you in person rather than on a screen.
Yes, it is.
So we're here to talk about Christine's latest novel, which is called The Narrow Land, which has recently won a major award, the Walter Scott Award for historical fiction. And the judges for that award called it a quiet tour de force that places art at the centre of historical fiction, which is a fantastic accolade, Christine. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Were you surprised that it was in a category for historical fiction?
Yeah, I mean, it got in by the skin of its teeth because you have to be 60 years, there has to be 60 years since the time of the setting. So 60 years are just about passed, I think. It's set in 1950. And usually when we hear the description historical fiction, we imagine, something much further back.
Yeah. Long
dresses and bodices and fellas with powdered wigs and all that stuff. But so it came as a great surprise. I knew I was shortlisted. I presumed they would cancel it because of COVID. And it was also shortlisted for the Dalkey Literary Award. And I mention that now not to show off, but because I really admire both organisations for going ahead with the prizes at a time where it wouldn't really serve them, particularly the Dalkey Literary Award, because it was the inaugural prize.
Yeah.
So within the space of 24 hours, the book had been out 18 months, remember, and it had, good reviews, but it had been overlooked for other prizes that had been put up for. And I just thought it had run its course and that was kind of it, and it was just forget about it now. And then suddenly within a space of 24 hours I heard I'd won 2 prizes.
Fantastic.
And I nearly had a heart attack. I just couldn't believe it. It was just unbelievable. But anyway, great. It was wonderful.
Thoroughly deserved. Yeah. Thoroughly deserved.
Thank you.
So it's set, as you said, in 1950. It's set in America. It's really a portrait of a marriage. It's the artist, the painter Edward Hopper, and his wife Joanna or Jo, and they're spending their summer, as they usually do, in Cape Cod, and that's where the novel is set. And it's a portrait of a marriage. It's also a sort of a capturing a particular moment in the middle of the 20th century with the Second World War only very recently behind. And there's another character, there's the marriage is at the centre of the novel, but there's also a young boy. And he's observing the couple. And do you want to say a little bit about how he came to be there? The boy?
Michael, the novel is told from the perspective of 3 people, and that's Jo and Edward Hopper and Michael. They're the only ones whose mind we really get into, and they observe everybody else who's in the novel. And Michael was in my mind for about 3 years before I started to write this novel, but I didn't know what I was going to do with him. And he came about when I was in Germany, and I was at the Leipzig Book Festival, and I had a translator with me. I don't speak German. So when I read, he translated. And we went for dinner one evening, and he started to tell me a story about children after post-war Germany and children just after the Second World War, and the scale of malnutrition and how the children were just in really bad condition. And a lot of them were orphans. And he told me that they would have to get on trains and be sent to farms to be fattened up. Wow. And you often didn't know anybody else in the train, the other children, you were just bundled in. And some of those kids went on to be adopted. And I said to him, oh God, like little piggies going off to the market to be fattened up. And he said, that's exactly what it was like. So that phrase about the little piggies and this idea, this image of a little boy in patched up clothes. The clothes were made, he didn't tell me this, but I had known this for some reason. Clothes were made out of dead soldiers' uniforms. Oh, wow. They cleaned them, they'd scrub them, and then they would, you know, patch up clothes. And they would, this little 5-year-old boy stayed in my head on a train going through this countryside that was ravaged by war and destruction, and being German, you know, and he's a German boy. And he just stayed in my head. So he was having a snooze or wandering around my head, and every now and then he'd wake up and wander around, but I wasn't ready for him yet. And then I happened to be in Boston at another book festival about 3 years later, and we took a side trip to Boston, to Cape Cod, and to a very remote part of Cape Cod. It's stuck between Provincetown, and which is sort of almost like the gay capital of the region, where a lot of people seem to come to be gay in peace, you know, and a very respectable. They leave these very straight-laced lives otherwise, and then they come to this town. And to us, to Irish people, it seems so dated. It's like being in on Dick Emery's set or something like this. It seems so silly almost, because it's so accepted to be gay in Ireland. People don't even think about it anymore. And the other end then is Hyannis, the Kennedy playground, you know, where all the yachting crowd go. And this little tract of land is there, and beach, and it's very otherworldly and very remote, and there's a house there and then a house somewhere else, another mile up the road, and the light is just so searing. The light is really a really strange light, and I knew when I got there that was going to be my location, because location is very important to me.
But did you already know that you were going to write about Hopper?
No.
Oh, I see.
But I knew that Hopper. We decided to take this Edward Hopper tour, as it was called, and it was myself and my husband and another man and a woman driving the car. And she was from the area, and most of the tour was about her talking about her family, telling us stories about her family, or vaguely pointing to a location that Hopper might have had painted, or telling gossipy bits about him that I sort of was thinking sitting in the back of the car. There's absolutely no proof. How could she know that? And, you know, and but anyway, it was fun. But I sort of thought, I was thinking when I was looking out the car, I love the light, I love the location. The location to me is just as important as the character.
Yeah, no, it's a really important part of the novel, the setting, and it's so vivid.
You have to have that right. And then I thought, well, I might give Edward Hopper a little cameo role for himself on the side of a hill, and if I get my boy over here, and I have to work out how to get him over here, he'll see them. But that was it. I didn't think any more of it at that point.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, and I think you wrote in the Irish Times that you watched a documentary about Hopper when you were recovering from an operation.
I came home and I wrote the first chapter. And I write the first chapter 100 times maybe, and then I'm happy with it. When I'm happy with that, I'm ready to spring on to the next.
Yes.
Everything after that is a little bit easier. So anyway, I wrote the first chapter, and I had Michael, and I had subsequently found out about President Truman had published a directive that he wanted all displaced children. I think it was published in 1947 or 46 maybe. And there was, just thousands upon thousands of displaced people in Europe in different camps, but a lot of children who were orphans. And he said he didn't care whether they were children of German soldiers or if they were children of, say, Jewish people who had died in the Holocaust. He wanted them all to be given an opportunity, an equal chance. Get them, so different to the present president. Get them over here, and we'll get their papers in order, whatever way you have to do it, and we'll have them adopted into American families. Right. So that gave me an excuse. Gave me I said, great, that'll do me. That's how Michael gets from Germany to America.
Yeah.
So he's adopted in America, and he has difficulty, and he is. The war is still very much in his head and in his heart, and he's a little bit disturbed. Naturally, he will be. He's seen things that he doesn't understand, but they're still in his mind. And he's adopted by a New York working class family, and they send him off to Cape Cod to be company for a little boy, another little boy who's the same age, he's 10 at this stage, called Richie, who comes from a wealthy American family, and Richie has lost his father in the war, and so has Michael, but on different sides of the war. Yeah. So I was interested in that idea of forgiveness and how you get over it and all that sort of stuff. So I had him on the train, and he was on the train, and I hadn't a clue what I was going to do with him when I got to Cape Cod. But he was just at the last scene where he wakes up, and around that time I went to the doctor to get a prescription filled. And when I got there, it was a new young doctor. And out of meanness, really, she said to me after 2 minutes, is there anything else I can help you with? And half out of meanness and half out of, she seems so young, you know, the way doctors and police, they always say the policemen as well, all start getting really young, that I thought, oh, well, I'll tell her about my pain in my back. I had a bit of a niggly pain in my back. And she started to ask me loads of questions. And then she said, have you, anybody in your family ever had ovarian cancer? And I said, oh, right enough now. I had an aunt who died from ovarian cancer. And she kind of went, oh, well, I'm going to send you for a scan. And I was going, oh God, why did I open my mouth? Yeah. So she sent me for a scan, and the scan, no sign of ovarian cancer, but a tumour was discovered on my kidney. And it turned out I had cancer of the kidney. So I had to have the kidney out. Anyway, that's a big, long way of answering your story. And I had a difficult recovery, and I had insomnia, and I had all sorts of complications, and I couldn't sleep. So I would lie on the sofa in the afternoon in the sitting room, and I watched the television. And one day I found a documentary I had recorded, really for I'm interested in Edward Hopper anyway, but mainly I recorded it because I knew the scenery would be useful. And it was set in Cape Cod in their summer house. Oh, okay. Yeah, yes. So the scenery was useful. So I would I looked at about 5 seconds of it, or a few seconds, and I fell asleep. But I could hear his voice, because they interview him. I could hear his voice going into my head, and I could hear her voice going into my head. And every day I did this, it became my sleep time, that I would lie on the sofa, wake all night, lie on the sofa, and the times when I stayed awake grew, and the times when I slept diminished. And somehow I entered their marriage while that happened, and I knew then that they were going to muscle in and they were going to take over the whole novel. So that's how that happened.
It's fascinating to hear that, the process of just one step leads to the next.
Yeah, it does. You never know where you're going to go. It's the wonderful thing about a novel. You never, when people say, what's your new novel about? And you're saying, well, I'm telling you this, but it could be something completely different. But at that point, I knew that they would have a central role.
Yeah, and to what extent were you constrained, or did you feel in any way inhibited about the fact that these were not characters, that these were real people who lived not that long ago, and that there are actual biographical facts and so on?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because I'm usually a bit sniffy about people writing about real people. Because I always think, well, if it wouldn't stand up in court, and especially usually with biographies, but even with fiction, I get very upset about James Joyce sometimes, the way, and Charles Dickens. I really do, because I'm thinking, you see things that it's a supposition on page 10 and suddenly it becomes a fact on by page 29 it's a fact. Yeah. And I hate that. And so I was always reluctant to bring anybody real into my work up to that point, but I couldn't resist it. But what happened was I read a biography, and when I was reading the biography, I was very disappointed. I was kind of thinking, I thought Edward Hopper was a nicer man than that now. And the biographer was saying sort of that, he held his wife back and he stopped her from being an artist in her own right, and he prevented her from doing this, and he was violent, and he was this, and he was, there was a lot of very negative things about him. And it seemed so against the person, the man that I had forged almost a relationship with during this watching, several watchings of the documentary, that I read it again. And this time I looked at it more like a lawyer would look at it. I was saying, where is this evidence coming from? And it was coming from letters that his wife had written and her diary that she'd kept. And I already had ascertained that Jo Hopper was a very volatile woman who was up and down and changed her mind. One minute he was a god, he was the most wonderful man in the world. Yeah. And the next minute he was this complete bastard who stopped her from her career and stopped her from everything.
Yes, and so that kind of erratic
very erratic
tone that it's really captured in her voice, and it makes the fact that we actually have her point of view, it makes her more sympathetic than if you just read about her. I think. It's very interesting that she started out as an artist herself, a painter.
Yeah, she did. They went to the same
college. And then she married him.
Yes,
and she seemed to take on the role of being almost his manager. And then she began to really, it was more than scrutiny. It was like surveillance. The way she watched him so closely in everything he did. And it was almost like she was living totally vicariously.
She was, yeah. And I think her great tragedy was, I think she's the soul of an artist, and she really, really wanted to be an artist. But unfortunately, she just didn't have the talent. Now, I didn't know this until I actually saw her paintings. You can see she's flair, but she would have a very average talent, and certainly when she was living with one of, the most brilliant artists of the 20th century. And you really only see how brilliant Edward Hopper is when you see his paintings in a gallery, and the power just zooms out at you from the wall. It's not really reproduced in magazines or in books.
No,
or
it's
anything,
true. It's true. It's something about the depth of colour as well.
Something about it. Yeah, something about the way he does it.
I mean, I found it really almost tragic.
It is
her
tragic.
story.
It is very tragic.
And I actually really would love to see more of her paintings and to almost give her a fair hearing.
I think if she'd have developed maybe in her own pathway, but she was always trying to emulate him, and I think that held her back too. But she was an extraordinary character. She was an early feminist who didn't like women. And she hated women being around him. She was very suspicious of other women.
That comes across.
She
very jealous.
Very jealous.
Yeah.
And she would insist on being his model. They got married when they were 40. And she insisted on being his model. But he always painted women who were taller and buxom, sort of well built. And she was a tiny bird-like little creature. She was 5 foot and he was 6'7". So they were opposite in every way. And when she spoke, she was very quick delivery and very, she'd be springing from one subject to another, and he would be really slow in his delivery.
Calm
and he didn't want
deliberate.
to talk about his art, but she loved speaking about art.
Yeah.
And very sort of arty-farty the way she went on, And they were very, very opposite in many ways. But I tried in it to only write about things that she'd already acknowledged happened, not to invent things. Like when she says that she bit his finger to the bone, bit his hand to the bone.
Is that in her diary?
That's in her diary.
Oh, I see. I did.
Or a letter. I can't remember. Yes, she wrote to someone, almost boasting about it.
Oh, okay.
Well, I gave him as good as he got.
Yeah.
I bit his hand to the bone, and things like that. And the way she would drag out her paintings every time they had a visitor to get them to show, to look at him, which he would never do. And the scene where she makes him bring her paintings into his gallery to try and sell them and that kind of stuff, that all happened.
It's astonishing.
Yeah, it is. That all
very,
happened.
very sad.
It is very sad. But she adored him. On the other hand, she absolutely adored him.
She did, and yet she was also trying to control him all the time.
Oh yeah, she controlled him. But she did a lot for his career, it has to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
Edward Hopper sold his first painting when he was 30 and a second painting when he was 40. That's 10 years.
Huge gap.
The gap. But she would take over and she would say, oh no, you don't know how to hang these paintings. You're not doing this right. She was very much, and she was also against the Whitney Museum being the sole recipient of his estate. And she left her paintings too, which of course were just pushed aside.
Did they? I wonder. And so, what actually happened to them? Paintings.
Her paintings were just. I don't know where they are. I went to the New Whitney to have a look, and I was really disappointed with how few paintings they had of Edward Hopper. They had a couple of drawings. I think they'd 3 drawings and 2 paintings, and not the big paintings. And I actually made a complaint about it, and I asked, and I wrote, and they said, "Well, thank you for pointing that out, but we have so many paintings to show." It was, It was very sad, I think, that he went to the trouble of showing, because they were the first ones really to recognise him, and he left the Whitney. But once money and commerce comes into the equation, and that's when that becomes the foremost consideration, that's what happens, I think.
It's about acquiring a Hopper.
Or they put it into, as she said after, in one of the pieces in it, I made this bit up though, but it was her idea that after he dies, his will become trophies to hang on rich men's walls,
Yes.
And that's what did happen. But even in the New Whitney, where I only have one painting here and another painting there, and it's all about how the paintings are shown, they don't allow enough room. I think they should have a room for an Edward Hopper room.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Would you like to read a piece from Jo, just so we get a sense of
Jo,
her voice and
this is
the way she is so attuned to him, like almost like a spy, I think. You know, she's like,
she watches every move you make,
yes.
every step you take. But this is when we meet her in the beginning, this bit. And as I said, when I started to write it, it was really to give Edward Hopper a voice.
Yeah.
To look at things from his side point of view. And then as I got to explore her, I didn't really like her that much when I started. And then when I started to explore her, I got to like her and I got to pity her, really.
I think that comes across as well. And then that the more we go into her mind and her very strong feelings, her emotions, you do feel a huge amount of empathy for her. I did anyway.
I felt that myself.
I think that's the great achievement of the book, actually.
Yeah.
You know, objectively, you could find her extremely
some people hate her. Some people write to me and say, "Oh, she was," you know, and they give out stink about her. But anyway, this is the first time. Now we've just left Michael getting off the train.
Okay.
You know, and now we're going to meet the next character.
We're in Cape Cod.
We're in Cape Cod. Yeah. So this is the first time we meet her. So I don't need to explain. This is the first time we come across her.
Thank you.
His slow footstep crosses the studio floor, and from the kitchen she follows his progress. There is a tapping of brush handles against the wooden sides of the box, the rustle of squeezed-down paint tubes. Now the sound of his hand pushing jars and oil cans around on the back shelf. He is gathering the afternoon about him, making his choices. Footsteps again. After that, a long pause, and she knows he is standing by the north window now, long arms behind his back, clasped at the hands like a bracket. She imagines him there, leaning into the window, the slight stoop at his shoulders that has lately become more prominent, the bottom lip stretched in concentration, and his broad, benign face staring out, patient as a fisherman. He is looking for his sky. His mind running clear, nothing to clog or confuse it, and Saturday afternoon will have long since evaporated. And why should he concern himself with Saturday anyhow, almost 3 whole days ago, for goodness sake, when there are far more important things to worry about than a wife and her chewed-up heart. The long-legged bathers from the house up the way may well get a second glance as they come tiptoeing down the steps for their afternoon swim. But he won't waste much time wondering how come they have changed direction since Saturday afternoon, turning right now towards Pamet Harbour instead of their usual left. Because he's forgotten all that and how it was her neck put on the line, her face they laughed into, her spit-spraying words as she tried to explain. My husband, you see, doesn't like to be distracted, doesn't like people poking around on his beach, intruding on his private swim, blocking his light should he decide to paint, or, you know, just stand for hours and gaze out like an imbecile at the sky. He is such an important person, you see. My husband, my husband, my... She pulls her little ponytail tight to her head and opens the kitchen cupboard. Pretty cans all in a row. Canadian pea soup, Boston chowder, various species of beans, sweet corn and peaches. Enough to keep him going for a few days anyhow. From the scrapyard pile of dirty dishes in the sink, she pulls the can opener free and places it where he can easily find it. She will not be needing it anyhow. She will not be eating, nor will she be doing any of that other stuff either, cooking or cleaning or washing or worrying about what to serve next. Let him take care of himself for a while, see how he enjoys all that. She moves to the kitchen table, positions her seat where, if she wants, and she may not even want, she can keep an eye on the studio through the gap in the door. Then she hauls her drawstring work back from the floor and settles it like a plump child onto her lap. They will have thought her crazy, the sunbathers. They will have made her a topic of their after dinner conversations, sitting out on the porch playing their records or swilling cocktails on the verandas of other vacationers they have befriended along the way, exchanging their little experiences, passing on their summertime tips, the best place to hire a boat, to eat striped bass, to find a reliable babysitter. And then, while relaying the little peculiarities of the region, the stick-thin girl who goes out walking alone at all hours of the night, or the middle-aged couple necking behind the cold storage plant. Someone may say, "We found this crab on the beach, the biggest crab I have ever seen." Someone else will throw in, "Speaking of crabs on the beach, we met this crazy old lady near ours." "You don't need to say another word. We know her. We know who she is. Oh, how hilarious." Pretty soon, even the locals will know about the encounter. Everyone will know. Word will probably worm its way to Mrs. Sultz in her sanatorium. Crazy, old, these are the words they will use to describe her. She widens the mouth of the work bag and then sticks her hand into the soft heap of rags inside. "I may be crazy," she mumbles, "but I am not old. 67 is certainly not old."
That's great. That's absolutely great. There's that sense of her total paranoia about other people.
Oh, yeah.
And that really comes out in the sort of set piece of the novel, which is the party, the big summer party in the neighbour's house where the Hoppers end up going,
Yeah.
and where Michael is staying for the summer, and Jo has the most miserable day at the party. She just
love her.
She goes from one group of women to another,
Yeah.
and she
can't help insulting them.
She insults them, then she tells a whole pack of lies about her career,
Yeah.
at which point you just want to pull her away and say, "No, time to go home now."
Yeah,
you
I know.
And it's brilliantly done.
Because there's the two, his side of the party and her side of the party, and she sees, she goes full of hope,
she
and
does.
it's a disaster.
And yet she's always keeping her eye on him, though.
Oh yeah,
it's wonderful. It's actually very theatrical, that whole the party,
I know,
the day, the scene. It's so visual as well.
It's kind of difficult to take the plunge to write that party scene, because I said to myself, okay, and what I was writing, this is too long, this party's going on too long, and I said, oh Jesus, just go with it, just keep going with it. And I just said, okay.
There's a wonderful sense of a whole day, of a party, of ebbs and flows and different groupings and figures in a distance, and it's almost like I could see it as a painting, and so it's so visual. Yeah. But also there's a sense that something terrible is going to happen. Yeah. There is a real sense of foreboding, and in fact, it's the next day that something happens. So the whole time through the party, you're watching or waiting.
You're waiting for something.
Because Edward Hopper is fascinated by one of the women in the house.
He gets this big crush on Catherine.
Yes.
And I suppose the connection, it's kind of funny that I gave her cancer of the kidney.
Yes, yes.
And that wasn't my fantasy now, but I just thought, what will I give her? I had gone for my checkup to the urologist, and he said to me, happened to say to me, you're very lucky. If this had been the 1950s, we would have had to smash your ribs with a hammer to get at the kidney. And I thought, ping, I'll take that.
Yeah.
So I gave her, I wanted her to be someone who wasn't going to, had an illness. And the connection between young Michael, and Edward Hopper are both fascinated with Catherine.
By her, and she's very beautiful, and she's sort of aloof. And the way you've written it, we never hear her point of view. No. So she's always being looked at by others.
She's been looked at by the three of them.
And there's that sense again of her being a figure in one of his paintings.
Yes, exactly.
And it's so beautifully done. I would actually love to have got inside her head. Because I found her, the whole, those night escapades where she goes roaming on the beach on her own and drinking and everything. And I love.
She knows she's going to die.
She's going to die.
She knows she's going to die. And I got the idea when I looked at, I had to try and keep it to the facts, to the actual, what happened that summer in 1950. And he painted High Noon, which is a painting which is in the searing heat, and it's just this house on its own, and this very tall woman in the house. Yeah. And she, her head nearly hits the top. And I kept seeing these women in all his paintings and saying, who is this woman? So I tried to imagine, I gave her two roles. One is Catherine. She's Catherine in this particular painting, but she's also a woman that he remembers, a woman who did exist. When he was a young man in Paris, he had this fling. He left very little evidence behind him, with a married French woman. And she was very tall, and she's in the novel. Yeah. And she appears, I think, if you look at a lot of his paintings, there's a woman, and people who are experts in this will say she had this particular dark red hair, and then she becomes a blonde. He changes her look. But she does appear and reappear in his paintings, and she's not Joe Hopper, though Joe Hopper seems to think she's the one who she posed for him.
Yes.
And she did write a letter to somebody saying, oh, he's doing this painting and he's built a little house to copy how the light falls. And that I use that house, but in the thing that she shows it to Michael, the little house he built. And he makes me stand while he's painting, and then she says, why don't you just make her my height? And he said, because she's taller.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
and of course, Joe is jealous about that. That it's not always her.
It's not always her.
Yeah. So I found that really interesting that she's also doing this detective work to see who the model is.
She's very insecure. Very insecure.
Yeah. And there's so many great details, period details, and I love the fact that she's not exactly a classic 1950s housewife, is she?
She hates housewives. And she makes the speech at the party. The young housewives are there in their lovely frocks with the flowery frocks. And they're very happy. We must remember 1950, a few years after the war, the men were coming back to America. They were coming back after the war, and women who had been financially independent now had to, go back to the kitchen, go back to the house. Yes. So in order to make that all work, the idea of the American housewife has been heavily marketed. And this is the kitchen you can have, and you'll have your little nippy waist and your lovely little penny, and you'll have your station wagon in the driveway, and the husband will come home and say, hi honey, I'm home, and everything will be lovely, and your kids will all be very healthy, and everything will be very nice, and you'll have beautiful clothes to wear when your husband takes you to the country club.
Yes, and it was a lot about consumerism too, wasn't it? About getting women to buy things.
To buy things,
yes.
And also there was a huge hike in the standard of living. The wages were flying up. And everybody, no matter what their job was, could kind of afford to go on holiday and to buy a house and to buy a car, maybe 2 cars. And anyway, that was all being heavily done. And these young housewives were buying into it. But Jo sits down and she's not having a bit of them.
Yeah.
And she says it, and she says it out loud because she cannot keep her thoughts to herself. Anyone who goes into the kitchen, become a kitchen slave. And if you start that kind of thing, you're always going to be a kitchen slave. She probably had a point to it, as well.
So they seem to live on cans, tins of.
Now she is very house proud, actually. She was very house proud and cleaned her house. She wanted everything to be clean. And Edward Hopper himself, for a man of his time, would do the washing. Like they lived in a little apartment in New York that was up 72 steps and lived very frugally. But they built a house in Cape Cod and they went there every summer to work.
And did you? Christine, did you actually get inside the house?
I couldn't get in. It was like getting into Fort Knox. I tried to find my way into the house, so I wrote letters. I did a bit of detective work. I worked, for a while when I was younger as a detective, so I felt I could do it. I could follow this. And I wrote a letter, and there's a residency given to... She left the house. He died. He died first. And he died in his 80s, very ill when he died. And she didn't last much longer. And she left the house to this family that... in my research, I'd never come across them until they appeared after she left. I don't know when she met them and how she met them. So she left it to a family, and I worked out that it was given to an artist as a residency once a year, but it seemed to be the same artist for years and years. So I contacted him. No way would he let me. I said, could you give me the name of the family or contacts or anything like that? He wouldn't budge on it. Okay. So I said, okay, fair enough. Then I thought it's probably a tax dodge. That's why he's staying there. But anyway, when I got to Cape Cod, I knew it was Fisher's Beach, and I found an Airbnb down the beach from them. From their house. Fantastic. Which is great. Yes. But they were looking for an unmerciful amount of money for it.
Oh, I could say, yeah.
So I wrote anyway. My husband said to me, he wouldn't let that. He said, don't mind that, write to them and just say why you want the house and ask them, will they do a deal, because you're going out of season and whatever. So I said, oh God, okay. So I chanced it. I was embarrassed, but I did it. And they came down, she said, make me an offer. So I made her an offer. And she said, and I made it was more than I could afford, I have to say, but I didn't want to be taken advantage. She said, okay. So we went and we stayed in Cape Cod in that house.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, I nearly died, Helen, when I saw the house. It was magnificent. There was a huge grand piano, and there was a basement with a grand piano and a cinema in it. And no wonder, like 3 families could stay in it. No wonder they were looking for that kind of money.
Well, I think it's obvious that you did spend time there, because the landscape is really is the whole novel is suffused with it, and with the sense of expansiveness and the light. And
you can only do so much with books, and I had all these books. I had about the wildflowers of Cape Cod, the stars of Cape Cod, all this kind of thing. But you have to be there. I think boots on the ground is really the only way you can do it. But we got up to the house, and it was completely accessible. You couldn't get in, but we could walk around. We imagined, or I kind of invented this invisible dog, Rover, who used to escape. Rover, come back! And I'd run up the thing after it. And we were able to walk around the house, sit on those, you know, these chairs outside, the wooden chairs that they have in the, and the veranda,
so you
sit on the porch.
Very close.
And up the steps of the garage where Michael has his, from the garage where Michael has his accident. And, you know, and I was able to see all that.
Oh, great.
But then I went to the local library, and they were brilliant. And I told them what I was at. And they said, hold on a second. And she disappeared. Don't go, she said. I might be a while, but stay there. I'll be back to you. So about 3/4 of an hour later, she came back with a dusty packet of photographs. And they were photographs of the inside of the house just after Edward Hopper died. Oh, when the people came for the first time, the people inherited.
I see. Well, that was a gift.
So that was a gift. So I could really imagine my way into the house then.
And, you know, is there anything, and I mean, I suppose we're only talking about this because they were real people, and is there anything that you felt that you risked or that you invented that worried you, or?
Not really. I mean, I was asked by somebody, an agent actually in New York, who I think was hinting that they wanted Edward Hopper and Catherine something to happen with them, you know, sex on the beach type of thing. Yeah. And I was kind of thinking, Edward Hopper could hardly walk at this point. You know, he did get better. Yes. But he was ill during that year. And it'll just make it, it's just too obvious. I don't think
it's a bit obvious.
That would be too obvious. I just wanted him to, I wanted it always for him to just be in his imagination.
Yeah, and we are. And there is a lovely ambiguity on the night. There is a night where he disappears, let's just say. Yes, yeah. And I mean, of course, the sort of cheap side of my mind is saying, well, maybe he's meeting Catherine. Maybe he's meeting Catherine on the beach.
Maybe he did, but I certainly wasn't going to go down and put the camera on them.
No. I love that. I love that you left those spaces.
Yeah, I want people to imagine.
There's a sort of an enigmatic quality to how you end the novel as well. It's almost like the camera pulls back and we leave them in their lives and we don't follow everything and we don't know the full story.
And he was so reserved as well. I just couldn't see it. He was very, very reserved. And I just couldn't see it. He never gave her any reason to be jealous.
It was all in her own.
It was all in her own. She had a very insecure background, I think. Her father and brother both died because of alcohol, quite young.
Yeah. Well, that explains a lot, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, could we hear him? Could we hear Edward?
Yeah, we hear him now,
because I think it's the voice of Edward is so different. And I think what we get is the painter's eye coming through, how he's looking at the front facades of buildings. He's trying to find his next painting.
He finds his next painting and he keeps his painting in his mind for a long time before he actually starts to work.
Yes.
And that year he only produced 2 paintings actually while he was in Cape Cod. And it was a source of he's very disturbed by the fact it was.
It was almost like he was a bit blocked.
Yeah, he was a bit blocked.
Not surprising with his wife kind of
I know,
keeping him under her watchful eye.
Yeah, anyway. She was. But this is going back to the because I think it all comes from the childhood. Yes. And I'm always interested in that. And this comes back, just a little short piece about him remembering. He's actually standing on the beach in Cape Cod in the water, realising that the doctor doesn't want him to swim anymore for the moment because he has diverticulitis and he thinks it's bad for the condition. So he's standing there wondering how long more he's going to be able to go into the water and how long more he's going to swim. And he's remembering how his love of water and light happened. So he's remembering back. When he was a small boy, he could see it through his bedroom window. He would stretch out his hand and believe he could touch it. It had seemed that close. Why could he not feel it, he used to wonder. Why won't it allow me to feel it? He thought if he could just reach up to the window and open it down, he would be able to step right out and be there in the middle of it, splashing and floating and smothering himself in all that light. They had an Irish maid then, young to be so far away from home, though he hadn't thought so at the time. Inclined to sarcasm, which had annoyed his mother, but seemed to amuse his father. Mary, was that her name? Mary showing him how to skim stones in the water, that funny way she had of scolding him. You and your boldness, I'll cut your 2 ears off your head and feed them to the ducks. Mary crying behind the kitchen door and him throwing his arms around her hips and declaring his love for her. Poor Mary, if that was even her name. He had never been afraid of the water. His mother worried, calling him back in, the wind tossing her words around. I said now, now, now. No sense of danger, that's his trouble, she would say then, drying his hair with a compact aggression that hurt like hell. But he liked it too, her hand whipping the towel over his hair, and his brain rattling around in his head, his forehead against her breast, the secret smell of her underarm, sweat and something sweeter. In later years he would tease her that his early baldness was down to her hair drying technique. And then there was the river. He was maybe 8 years old by then, running downhill to it and being completely lost in the sounds and the smells of the Nyack boatyard, his father striding behind, calling out to him to slow down. But he couldn't slow down. The best he could do was run back now and then, a breathless pause, a hop and a couple of words before taking off again. Later still, learning to smoke with his school pals, blots of light on the underbelly of the bridge. Grasshopper, that was the nickname he'd had then, 12 years old and already 6 foot tall. So that's Edward in his early days.
It's fantastic. And it's so different, the voice, you know. And,
yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a bit about how you go into the characters. We have the child Michael again, a very specific and brilliant child's point of view. Do they take you over in a sense, those voices?
Yeah,
and
it's very difficult to explain how it happens. I think writers are the one art form where you can't actually touch your subject. You know, if you're a painter, you feel the paint. A musician, you feel the notes vibrating on the instrument. But a writer they're all just words, and you have to try and get in touch with your character as much as you possibly can. And the way it's similar to acting, I think, in a way. And what I try to do really, and it's from the time I was a young woman, and when I read, say, Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway in particular, and James Joyce, Leopold Bloom in particular, Leopold Bloom was the first one. When I was reading that, and even though a lot of Ulysses went over my head at that point, I was aware that I was inside his head, and I was like a little camera, and I was looking out through his eyes, and I was hearing only what he heard. And he'd meet somebody in the street, and the person on the street wouldn't know what he was thinking, but I knew because I was in his head.
Yes.
And I said to myself then, if I ever become a writer, that's how I'm going to do it. Yes. So you get into their head and you imagine, what would it be like to be him? What was he like when he was a child? And I went to the house in Nyack, and it's a sort of a museum, but they've kept the house intact, so you can see the room he slept in.
As a boy.
And I stood in that room and I looked out at the light on the river, and the little piece of the Hudson that he saw.
So you are like an actor preparing.
You're like a method actor.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're trying to prepare for that. And I could hear my feet on the ground, on the floorboards, because they'd have floorboards and rugs. And I could imagine my way into what he was like, you know, as a child. And his father, I saw the shop. His father used to have a dry goods store. And I could see the shop and go into the shop. It's not a dry goods store anymore, but I could see the actual shape of the shop, and I was able to use that. And you use all those kind of little fragments, plus your own instinct.
Yes, and there's a certain
yourself.
amount of empathy.
Yeah, you have to get that.
Imaginative empathy or empathetic imagination.
Yeah, that's what I think a writer needs more than anything else, is empathy. You have to be able to look at the other side of it without judging it. You have to become them all, as much as you can do, you know, without actually judging it too much, and hope instinct will take over, you know? Yeah,
and do you feel that you're leaving yourself, Christine, behind when you're immersed, say you're writing Edward, you know?
Yeah, when I started to write in the beginning, you're very self-conscious and you're kind of thinking, oh, this is stupid and this sounds stupid and people think I'm stupid because I did this stupid. And then I just know, and if you have to give advice to a young writer, remember, you do not matter. It's none of your business. Get out of here. You know, get lost. You let your character do the talking. If you have your location and you have your first character, I lower them down into the thing, lower them down onto the location, let them move, and it's really nothing to do with you at all.
All right, so you have to get out of the way.
You get out of the way, just step out of the way.
Yeah. And do you think that's particular to fiction, I suppose, because
to fiction,
or theatre, or playwriting, that you're creating characters.
Yeah.
In other kinds of writing, were you ever tempted to write an essay about the Hoppers, for example?
I did a bit. I did write an essay about the Hoppers. And that's different than but it had to be done in retrospect, because I was writing about how I wrote the book, really.
Yes, yeah.
You know, and I gave a talk down in Limerick at probably the last live Limerick festival. It was the last one I was at, and hopefully it won't be the last one ever, but where there was that atmosphere, where there's people in the hall and you could talk to people afterwards and that. And I gave a talk about how I made the book, how the book was built. And that was, you know, first I wrote an essay form, and then I did it there, and I did it in Monte Carlo in the Princess Grace Library as well.
So I'm interested in that shift then to actually inhabiting a character.
Yeah, and it's a different thing, but you're really talking about what Edward Hopper was like, what I think he was like, and what I made him like, and you know, that
you
shift.
Recreated him almost.
Yeah, you have to recreate him, and you have to kind of bring life into him. When you become him, to a certain extent, you have to become him. And you've got to become a child, a German child, an American child, and all the, you know, the different people. But although I didn't get into Richie's head, he's observed as well from the history. You know?
I mean, the timing, the placing of the novel in 1950, I think, adds a whole other strand because of the war.
Because of the war and the new war coming up then. They're all beginning to relax, and suddenly the war in Korea starts.
I mean, it's just that moment, and we were very aware of the war dead, the American soldiers. That one of the characters is a widow, a war widow. And there is that sense of that she seems to be becoming an alcoholic, and
she
you
is,
know, and that. And then of course Michael has experienced terrible trauma as a young child, so that's all there. So there's so much life in this novel. I mean, it's like everything is there.
And the funny thing is, when I was writing this novel, and it seems so melodramatic to say it now, I just did it as a form of recovery. But when I was writing when you're going up the hill, you know, with it, and you're not sure how it's going to work out, I actually didn't think. I said, I'm going to just try and write every day, and even if I only manage to do an hour, maybe that's enough, and I'll be very tired after it. And the back of my head thought, you mightn't get to finish this now, but it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just write it, go for it. You know, just go for it. Don't think about anything else, and just do it. It'll put in the days. It'll put a bit of structure onto the days. And then I gradually began to get stronger. So it's sort of, you know.
It probably helped you.
It did help me enormously. It's my recovery novel, and it did sort of do that, and all those different things came in. I'd read Anthony Beevor's book Berlin, and I had a previous child in another novel called Last Train from Liguria, who's a half Jewish child.
Yes.
And the temptation, and I loved him very much, I have to say. And even though, you know, at the end of the novel, it's implied that something terrible is going to happen to him, but I did love him when I was writing it. And with this boy here, I was interested also in the inheritance of guilt.
Yeah.
And Richie's mother, she sees him as a German. He represents the German people, the people who killed her husband.
Definitely. I mean,
and she tries not to.
Yes,
she can't
it bursts out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does burst out.
Her I suppose, hostility to him, and I think a bit of fear as well of him as being other, coming from that European war.
Those people.
Yes,
those people are capable of anything.
I mean, that was another. There's so many little ripples of that going through, and then I was really interested in the chapter titles. And I think a whole planet.
That's right. I was in
one Venus and Mercury.
I know. It sounds as if I never spent a night. That the writers have a great time going all over the place. Most writers are very businesslike. They go and do the reading and they go home. I usually hole up with a husband, and we always convince ourselves, sure, seeing as we're going to Canada, we might as well,
have a trip.
So we went to Montreal, and I wasn't long. I was on a walking stick at that point, my father's walking stick, which I lost in Montreal, and I was devastated. And then I decided it was a sign that it was time to start standing on my own 2 feet again. And anyway, it was one of those. It was still snowy and iced out, and you cross. You don't see anybody around at all. This is in Montreal, and myself and my husband Dennis decided one evening we were going to to listen to this concert in the concert hall in Montreal, and going across, nobody around at all in the twilight, going across and the the snow and everything. And we get in, and it was announced that the very famous Japanese conductor couldn't do it, so a young girl was going to. She looked like a schoolgirl to me, and she came out and she had a ponytail right down her back. And as she conducted and brought light, the ponytail was going swish, swish, as she conducted the orchestra to this amazing piece of work. And suddenly, the structure of the novel came to me. It just came to me, I thought, because it's the bringer of war, the bringer of jollity, the bringer of old age, all these different movements within it. Yeah. And I thought, well, Jo Hopper is the bringer of war. She can't go outside the door without having a row with somebody, you know. And Michael was also the bringer of war because he brought the war with him in his heart and in his head. Yes. And the nurse had already told him that.
Yeah.
He brought it with him for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And then Venus was Catherine, who was this sort of this wispy sound that is kind of it's there, but you can't actually feel it or touch it. And they all just kind of walked in front of me.
Well, and that's it. And also the way they're orbiting around each other.
Yeah.
And particularly at the party, but also Hopper and Jo. And so, I mean, it's just the most perfect sort of
I always
metaphor.
I always have a soundtrack, but this time the soundtrack, when I'm writing a novel, something that reminds me, when I'm away from the novel, it reminds me. So I don't have to think about it all the time. If I'm in the car, I put it on, and I can think about other things, but it works on the subconscious, thing. But but this time it became part of the actual way,
the structure almost. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to hear you talk about the process of making the book,
And you put on Saturn, and boom, boom, and you think of poor Earl Edward trying to make his way back up the steps after being in the water, Yes,
exactly. It's so rich. It's so rich, and I just think it's wonderful that from your illness something as beautiful as this is made.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
So, Christine,
it was a surprise.
I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's just I hope this is such a great conversation about it, and I feel hope that readers will enjoy that as well.
I hope they will.
Viewers. So I'm going to say thank you, and
my pleasure. Thank you indeed.
It was just great, and there are lots of other Culture Night events from Wicklow, but from the Mermaid we're going to say goodbye and thank you.